The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Hey!
Hey, at last.
Yes. How are you?
We're good. I'm needing my glasses so I can see all your beautiful, handsome faces.
You're looking
We all
beautiful
need
there,
them.
man.
Yeah, you look amazing, Mick. You look fantastic.
Well, it comes under the heading, I'm not dead yet.
You know, Mick, there's so much to talk about with your band. I mean, we were just saying, Guy and I, how extraordinary this history is.
Well, the interesting thing, Mick, is that there tend to be two types of musicians, right? There are people who kind of get in a band, align themselves with a band, and that's what they want to do. They want to be in a band forever. And then there's people who just want to go and work with lots of different people and be journeyman musicians. You've managed to do both. You've played with hundreds and hundreds of different musicians while staying in the same band the whole time.
Maybe I've done more than I realized in terms of playing with other people.
I mean, just within the band, you know.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. I mean, it's a little sub-bands. And part of that, I think, is really part of an answer where people go, like, me and John have been in Fleetwood Mac since the beginning. And in a slightly quippy, humorous way, you go, well, why is that? How is that? And I think it's really one of the benefits of being in quote, not in the front line, being in a rhythm section and yet being, you know, hopefully pretty useful intrinsically in terms of keeping everything together. And I don't mind saying that because I've learned to say it's okay. What did you really do in Fleetwood Mac? Well, I didn't write all the songs, but the band became my song, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice way of putting it.
I think it really kept me busy, where when we were down from playing, everyone else maybe was just more sensible. John would go sailing, and I was always looking like a mother hen as to what do I do? You know, I'm not sitting in the front living room playing guitar, playing piano, writing poetry like Stevie. I just wasn't that person. So when I think I just decided, well, then I just keep playing, you know.
All right.
And wait for the call, or rather make the call and gather the troops around, and then off we go again. So that probably was part of it.
You clearly have great organizational skills as well, if you're managing the band. And by the way, I must say, because the Peter Green Memorial, which I was at, was mind-blowing. And that's incredible feat, just getting all those people.
Yeah, I had brown underpants on that day. I'm really, and I'm looking at stuff now on the screen here up above me. But it's like that was a dream come true. Sadly, we lost Peter before this was supposed to come out a year ago, and now it's out, and we're actually super gratified. Glyn Johns, who produced the whole thing with me and was a huge help, was sitting there with a hit album as of the moment, with a very how would that be? You know, it's sort of like off the wall that it would even really get listened to, but it has been, and it turned out to be a hugely gratifying. I don't know if you saw the show,
yeah.
But there's a documentary still to come out, the making of, and of course we rehearsed here in Hawaii, and we had the greatest time. Then we all went off to London and did that one night, and then the world closed down.
That's right. Literally. Yeah, it's the last thing I went to. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of a longer rehearsal, and we just didn't. Thankfully, we didn't do it because had this sort of crept into another week of rehearsal, and then the show would have been allocated to be a little later, it simply wouldn't have happened. But I most certainly would have taken that core band with Johnny Lang and the guys and the band you saw, and then with the hope in England to go and play some blues festivals and stuff, maybe with a couple of the heavy hitters coming in to do it. And or the idea for me was to take that core band and actually replicate, you know, there's some great players all over the world. If you go to Australia, New Zealand, that are in the genre of being able to deliver some really cool renditions of those songs, And that was a loose idea. But in England, I was really hoping to go to Glastonbury or something and have the likes of the one or two special lads turn up.
Yeah. Mick, you've been drawn a few times to characters that wear their art on their sleeve but live on that fine line of tipping into the abyss, with obviously with Peter, with Peter Green and Jeremy and also Danny Cohen.
Yeah, so to have one in a band is kind of understandable and sort of stand back then, but three.
But there's something to be said about those characters. They're deeply into their performance.
Specifically with Peter, and indeed other elements that you're talking about, but these really, because they were all incredible. I consider myself highly tuned and sensitive, overly so, and a sort of sloppy date, but maybe I got lucky. They were in a world that became uncomfortable for them. And then the advent, especially with Peter, and he's openly has spoken about it, of course, he's the last person on earth that needed to be experimenting with psychedelics or being stoned in any way. And you go, well, why is that? Because he's already there. He was already that sensitive. Yeah. He was already beautiful and connected. And therefore his story, which is really why, well, I would say everybody on that stage was there for their own reasons and about the music, but it was also about the magic of who this person was, and what he left behind outside of his playing, because he was that powerful, and yet it freaked him out. When you have that type of presence, and everything you can tell about what he's done, what he did, was to belay that, was to play. Let's face it, he called the band Fleetwood Mac. He could have been the gunslinger that came in, and we would have willingly been there. He just wanted the name of the band to be Fleetwood Mac, and he said, well, it was an instrumental we did that John Mayall gave him a birthday present of some studio time with Gus Dudgeon when he worked at Decca Records before the whole Elton John thing, right. Coincidentally. And I remember the session, it was just me, John, and Peter. Right then, they said, well, what are you going to call it? And he said, well, call it Fleetwood Mac, because John and Mick are in here. And it was just a rough thing to put on the tape box. And that's how the name came about. Years later, he was furious. And I don't blame him. Mike Vernon had the first album that said Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. That's right. And he said, no, that's never going to happen. And I don't blame them, because Peter Green was the only thing that we had, coming out of John Mayall, and Peter Green is God, and Eric Clapton's crap, and all the stuff that used
to still.
All this stuff you spray painted over the underground.
Yeah.
And then before that, of course, it was Eric, and all this stuff was going on. So when we formed and put the album out, Mike Vernon, against seemingly his better judgment, but I don't blame him, called it Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and Peter was furious. It was too late; they were all printed up. And ever since then, it became, and then years later, the story along Shaggy Dog, I know I go around in circles, but years later, he had done an article, and I maybe it was with Jeremy, I don't know, a long time after the fact. And they were saying, well, how come the band's called Fleetwood Mac? And that's when he said, which when I heard it, I was not only incredibly moved, but it's a good story as to say how unselfish Peter was.
Yeah.
And not only with his playing, when he welcomed Danny Cohen in, he welcomed Jeremy in right at the beginning. He could have been, like you said, a creature that was in control of the whole thing very easily. And he said, well, one thing I just knew, and that I thought, I didn't know it at the time at all. He said, I just always thought that maybe I'd be moving on, and I wanted Mick and John to have a band.
And boy, did you. Do you know what I mean? Boy, did he get that right.
Yeah. A lot of your success is down to your vision in making choices. And there are probably there's a moment in your career which is akin to, in my mind, as a fan of it all, of Paul meeting John at that market fair. Fate, yeah. And it's you being in that studio and Lindsey Buckingham singing through the speakers, and that is one of the great apexes of rock history that changed so many lives. You've got to talk to us about that moment and how it felt and what went on.
Well, yeah, I remember it well. Bob Welch was still with us, who is yet another person who was a massive part of our history.
Yeah,
sadly missed, and a dear friend, and he had left the band. But we ended a tour, and I'm surprised he didn't tell me, but I think he just couldn't tell me until the last gig. He said, "Well, I'm leaving the band." And he was very unhappy in his personal life. So I understood, but it was sort of not a complete shock, but it was a bit of a shock. And prior to that, looking for a studio when Bob was in the band. And I went up to Laurel Canyon. There's a store which is still there with a great documentary about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's still there with pictures of Joni Mitchell and Mama Cass on the wall, and I'm woo the day they ripped that place down, and I need to go and film this story there and tell the story, because I never did it, and I meant to do it. Just so this is where it started, and I went in there, and Jenny and I were up in Laurel Canyon. I went just to get some groceries or something, an old beaten up Cadillac. I met this sort of crazy hustler type guy that I vaguely knew. He said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually looking for a studio. I've got a couple of weeks off before we end the tour for the next album." And he said, "Well, I'm repping an album, a studio called Sound City in the Valley." And so he knew a lot of rock and rollers, so he obviously got himself a job. And right there and then I said, "Well, I better just get my groceries out the back of this Cadillac, because there's no air conditioner, and the hood never worked, the top." So I shoved all my stuff in the back of his car, and I said, "I'll come with you now and take a look at the studio." And that was it. Walked in the studio. Keith Olsen was there, happened to be there, who produced Buckingham Nicks. Stevie and Lindsey happened to be in the studio doing demos for the next album, which ended up being the Fleetwood Mac album, Fleetwood Mac. And I had no reason, apart from the music must have been so, in the 20 minutes, half an hour of me hanging out at the studio, vague recollect more from Lindsey about sort of met me, and I saw Stevie through the window, and Keith said, "Oh yeah, this is the music." And he happened to put on Buckingham Nicks and said, "This is the music that I made with this duo. They're in there doing demos or something." And he played a tape just for want of something to play, to hear the speakers. And that's what triggered it. I then went back on the road. Bob, after a couple of weeks, then the end of the tour, said he's leaving, and I knew it. I thought, well, what are we going to do? And I remembered the music. And I phoned Keith Olsen up, and I said, "You know that music you played me? What's the story?" They joined Fleetwood Mac with not one note played. And I played it to John and Chris, and John said, "We're crazy. We've got to audition them or something." I said, "No." And they ended up agreeing, because they heard the album. And I said, I think this is the right thing to do.
But wasn't it you just wanted Lindsey, wasn't it? But the deal was Stevie had to come.
I was looking for it. Woo the day that Stevie will ever forgive me for the band. and much to, I found out the nice part of the story is, even though I get beaten up about it, is that Lindsey made it very clear that no me if Stevie's not there. And we were looking for a guitar player, and then very quickly, but she tends to forget, it became very apparent that she'd written half the songs, which I was more than well aware of, plus the loyalty from Lindsey with what they were doing. So they transported themselves with what they were about to do into Fleetwood Mac without playing a note.
And how did Chrissy feel about it? Because did she feel a little bit put out having this? I mean, let's face it, it's a gorgeous, beautiful, talented person coming into the group.
Well, Christine would tell the stories like this. He said, Mick, I think, all joking aside, there's nothing worse than two women that can't stand each other, like catcalling. So do me a favor, let me meet Stevie. And we all went out to a Mexican restaurant on 3rd Street. And they got on like a house on fire. And she wasn't really serious, but she was just saying, let me at least meet my fellow lady in the band. And I said, of course, you know. And we went out, and it was all a go, and they became and remained great friends. If ever there's a Broadway show, we should be able to put one on.
Oh my God! But what's extraordinary?
Shakespearean.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I
really.
mean, and it still is. You know, I've said a couple of things lately, and I don't mind, and going, it's, you know, likelihood of it happening, but I would like certain hatchets to be buried, and they really exist between Stevie and Lindsay. You know, so we'll see.
Because you're asking divorced people to be creative together, aren't you? And that's tough.
That's what the making of Rumours was a mess. So everyone in the band was completely disengaged from their partners while we made Rumours, and it's almost an impossible task. I had Warner Brothers phoning me up, going like, "Just be truthful. Tell me when the band's breaking up." I said, "No, we're going to make it. We're going to make it." And the music took care of that. But like Lindsay said years later, and I get it. He said, we were never able to heal.
Yeah. But do you think that's part of the the success is because of the amount of pain and honesty that goes into the songs, and the relationships between the people playing it is why that, you know, there's something about that album. It's like Dark Side of the Moon. It's entered the popular subconscious in a way that other records just haven't.
You know what I think it is, Guy? I think because their experiences was going into so deeply into the music that what you hear on that album is utter truth.
That's what I mean, and that's somehow that resonates with the wider world. But no matter if you know what's making it happen or not, there's an honesty and a pain in it that makes it real and makes it, you know, makes it truth. That's what true art is, isn't it? Someone sharing their truth.
I have to agree, and it's part of the sort of the long story of Fleetwood Mac, and I do like to think that, well, I not do like to think, I know that existed in the beginning of the band with Peter. The whole thing is no doubt a survival story, which is really beyond belief. We shouldn't have earned the right to survive, really, but we did, and we have, and it's all somehow connected to an honesty that was not planned, that ends up with being human and vulnerable and outside of the music. Sometimes foolishly so, we revealed way too much with what was really going on in the subtext of a lot of stuff, but we did, and sort of paid the price. It was very hard to do an interview without talking about who's creeping down the corridor and sleeping with each other, you know, when really we wanted to say, well, would you like to ask something about the music? It was our fault. We were very overly open about that. However, the end result is it's actually been a plus, because people look to the experience of whatever it is under the heading of this funny band called Fleetwood Mac, is that it has, my dad would say, like, no matter what, it's been worth a damn. And with all of the pain and all of the things where you go, like, sometimes, you know, especially me, but John go like, should we have kept it going? It's like so much heartache sometimes, but I don't feel that in retrospect. I think it's all been worth a damn. When we walk on a stage, God knows we hope it's about the music, and we believe it is, but there's also something else. And I think that became part of our story, which was a problem earlier on, but it is not now. And I think it becomes very meaningful for especially young people to grab onto a body of work that they can really see people as a major subtext to it. There are some bands that just, it's the band, but there's not a super emotional, especially what caused it was the man and woman, the love and the no love, the dysfunctionality thing was unique.
I saw you guys with Neil Finn at Wembley year before,
yeah.
I think it was. And he's great. He's a beautiful player. Absolutely love him. And, you know, I think this is the other, you know, you obviously know exactly who to choose, who works for you. But I think we all wanted Lindsay back. I mean, what's the future there?
Well, I don't think there's much of a future, but I do know in my world that I visualize, and we spoke very loosely about it. He said, I'd love to come out and have a play with you. And I think that I like to think would happen. And I think my whole thing would be that the band stays as it is. And I just think it's a pipe dream for sure. But the thought of walking on the stage and having Lindsay be part of that performance, I think would be very healing. It's not saying goodbye to Mike or to Neil, and you know, we don't behave like that. So the second, well, not second best, but another alternative, you know, I believe that me and Lindsay will make some music together, as he did with Christine and so forth. I would love that. And no matter what, you know, umbraged feelings that aren't healed for all their own personal reasons, I would like to be sort of the instigator of the hope that would happen before we all knock it on the head.
Well, I think the world would like that too.
No, I know they would, and it almost makes me cry.